Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is Reg Watch by RegulatorWatch.com, the only platform dedicated to watching the watchers. Strangulation by regulation. For the tens of thousands of Canadians who earn a living through the junior venture capital markets, that's exactly what some say is happening. Over the past 3 years, regulators such as the Canadian Securities Administrators, the CSA, and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, or IIROC, have implemented a slew of new rules and regulations intended to strengthen investor protection and increase surveillance and enforcement on brokers and advisors. Representatives from the boutique retail brokerage houses say the new red tape is bleeding them to death. Costs of compliance under the recent regulations have skyrocketed to over 60% of revenue. Changes have increased liability and killed profitability. As a result, many firms have closed up shop. So why should the average Canadian care? It does seem difficult to shed a tear for a stockbroker. Well, stakeholders say the regulations have devastated the already struggling junior resource sector, which is funded through the junior venture capital markets. Junior resource exploration is the high cost and high risk and high reward first step in developing Canada's mature resource economy. These companies find promising properties, prove the resources, stake the raw material, and help bring production online. They provide jobs for thousands of Canadians, including geologists, biologists, surveyors, and environmental engineers. Also, truck drivers, accountants, lawyers, and yes, even financial brokers. Joining us today to help us better understand how regulation is hurting the junior venture capital markets is Don Mosher, president of the Venture Capital Markets Association. Don, thanks for joining us. First off, who is the big bad regulator in this case?
The big bad regulator, the wolf in the den, is IIROC. They're the national regulator that oversees all licensed investment advisors in Canada, regardless of who they work for. They were given a mandate by the BCSC, for example, to oversee all the brokers in British Columbia. So I'm not sure what the BCSC does anymore because all surveillance and supervision have gone to IIROC.
And it's the same across the country?
Same across country. Everybody is under the IIROC if they're a licensed broker.
So Don, what has happened to the funding for junior venture companies?
The funding has dried up. The small independent brokers are being put out of business due to regulatory costs, liability pressures.
And how does that impact raising capital?
Once you lose the independent dealers, you lose the funding for small businesses. The big banks won't fund anything that you would consider a small business. So yes, if you're going to raise $500 million to $1 billion to build a mine, the banks are all in. But if you want to raise $500,000 to $10 million to explore, innovate, or create something, where are you going to go? We don't have the private equity pools in Canada that they have in the US.
You mentioned mining, Don. The exploration sector relies heavily on the junior capital markets, does it not?
In the city of Vancouver, there are 1,400 mining companies headquartered that generate $1.4 billion in just G&A. Then in addition to that, they raise 60% of all exploration budgets that are expended on a global basis. Now, if you lose the independents in town, which we used to have 41 dealers in the city of Vancouver, we're down to 7 and we're going to shortly have 5. You don't have anywhere to go to raise money. Those independent brokers acted as a conduit between the Canadian public, which funded the capital markets, and the companies that do all the exploration.
Don, how has the so-called retail investor been affected?
Well, if you're a broker and you're having to deal with the kind of liability that IIROC's imposing on them, you can't recommend venture deals to them anymore. And yes, that results in choking the very lifeblood off to the entire marketplace because you just cannot raise money from the public anymore. The public has been very much discouraged out of the marketplace.
But Don, the regulators would say they're only protecting the Canadian investor.
You know, you can talk about protecting the individual investor, but I think part of the formula should be protecting the Canadian economy and what's good for the overall population of Canada. If you no longer have capital markets that create jobs and wealth, what happens to the Canadian economy? 5-10 years out, you don't have anything being created.
Well, that's it for this edition of Reg Watch. Before you head off, please like us on Facebook and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.